This gentleman, who is
Willie, custodian of Dunfermline Abbey.
He is going to tell us the history of Robert the Bruce in 10 minutes or less. Please.
Now, the history of King Alexander III goes back to King Alexander III. He fell off the cliffs at Kinghorn, but he was also Edward I of England's brother-in-law through his first marriage. It was a thorn in Edward's side, so there's always the mystery. Did he fall? Was he pushed? Now, when he fell off the cliffs at Kinghorn, the next in line to the throne was his granddaughter. She was the Maid of Norway, and she was making her way to Scotland, but unfortunately, she died in the Orkneys, whether it be through rancid meat, seasickness, or she may have been poisoned, we don't know. Now, Edward I of England, he had a way of getting his hands on Scotland without any wars whatsoever. He betrothed his son to marry the Maid of Norway. And if they'd have married, they married 9, 10-year-old. Marriage was nothing to do with love. It was all to do with forming the families. If they had married, the law was that her possessions immediately become his. So if that had happened, Scotland wouldn't have been here today because we'd have all been England. But because that happened, because she died, that left Scotland without a king or queen. The next in line to the throne was Robert the Bruce's grandfather, the contender. Another one called Harry Hastings, another one called John Balliol. Now, they were all vying to be king of Scotland, and it was going to end up as civil war. So all the lords in Scotland, they thought this isn't going to happen. So they decided to ask Edward I of England for his advice on who to be king. And he did choose John Balliol, who was really the rightful heir. So by doing that, Bruce and Hastings distanced himself from the whole affair. Didn't want any more to do with it. Now, John Balliol, he was on the throne, but he was a puppet king. He just did everything Edward said. But eventually he got fed up with this. So he got an alliance with the French and raised an army against Edward. But Edward came up and absolutely crushed him. John Balliol ended up in a place called Brecon, with all this royal regalia. He was stripped of everything, taken to the Tower of London, imprisoned there for a lot of years, and then he was let out. He was wandered about the courts in France. So that left Scotland without a king or queen again. The next in line to the throne was Robert the Bruce's father, but he didn't want it. He passed the mantle on to Robert the Bruce. And from the Balliol line, it was a guy called John Cumming. Now, Robert the Bruce and John Cumming were both made joint guardians to Scotland. And Robert the Bruce and John Cumming absolutely hated each other. Every time they got together, they were fighting. So there was a Bishop Lamberton from St Andrews. He was put in as the go-between. So every time they got together, he was saying, come on, lads, just settle yourselves down. Now, what happened was, Edward I of England was on his deathbed, and Lamberton thought there's going to be a lot of problems in Scotland with this pair. So he came up with a plan. He said to John Cumming, he says, why don't you become king? Give Bruce your lands. And he says to Bruce, why don't you become king? Give John Cumming your lands. And John Cumming thought to himself, I think I'd rather have the land in the kingdom. So he agreed to Bruce being the next king of Scotland, and there was documentation made up where Bruce was going to be the next king of Scotland. But unfortunately for them, Edward made a full recovery. Now, Bruce and Edward were all on very good talking terms, and Robert the Bruce had already arranged him up with Edward. But unbeknown to him, John Cumming betrayed him and told Edward that Bruce had a document saying he was going to be the next king of Scotland. But fortunately for Bruce, he had friends in London, and the Earl of Sussex sent a servant to his room with a box. In the box was a set of spurs and a coin with Edward's face on it. And Bruce understood for that, get yourself out there as quick as you can, because if he had met up with Edward the next day, he'd have been arrested, done for high treason, hung, drawn and quartered, no ifs, buts or maybes. That's what would have happened to Bruce. But anyway, he managed to get himself back up to Scotland, and he arranged to meet with John Cumming in a place called Greyfriars Church in Dumfries. Now, Cumming was surprised to hear from him because he thought he was a goner. But anyway, when Bruce got there, he never made anything of it. And he says to Cumming, he says, I want to have a wee word with you. We'll go over to the altar of the church. So when they got there, he says to Cumming, you betrayed me. You betrayed me to Edward I. And a big argument developed. Out came the daggers. Bruce stabbed him. He didn't kill him, he stabbed him. He went outside and told his general, get in there and finish him off. And Bruce went up to Scone and got himself crowned King of Scotland. Now, by doing that, the Cumming family in Scotland were very powerful. So when Bruce came to the throne, he didn't have a lot of friends, he had a lot of enemies. Over the years, being a general, a politician, a fighter, he did manage to unite Scotland to be in one nation. But one of his true wishes was to fight in the Crusades, you know, the Holy Wars. But because Scotland was too dangerous, he couldn't go. By the time he got Scotland safe enough for him to go, he was actually too old. He died at the age of 54. He died in 1327. But what Bruce did before he died, he said to his friend and General James Douglas, the Black Douglas, "When I die, remove my heart, put it in a casket, take it with you to the Crusades." So when Bruce died, James Douglas duly did this. But they didn't get as far as Jerusalem or the Holy Land. They made it as far as Spain. And they were fighting the Moors in a small village called Teba, just above Malaga in Spain. Unfortunately there, James Douglas was killed. Robert the Bruce's heart had eventually come back to Scotland, but it's not buried in Dunfermline here. It's actually buried in a place called Melrose Abbey down in the Borders. And that's how they knew this was Robert the Bruce. When the workmen were clearing the site here, they found 2 big slabs. When they lifted the slabs, the coffin itself had been made of wood, so it had disintegrated, but the skeleton was covered in 2 sheets of lead metal with some gold cloth round the top was formed in the shape of a crown. When they took the metal from the chest, the breastbone had all been removed where the heart had been taken out. One of the other factors was, when they measured the skeleton, it measured 5'11". Robert the Bruce himself was known to be 6 feet tall, and that was exceptional in those days, because the average size of a Scotsman in Bruce's day, 5'3", 5'4". And that's my wee story about Robert the Bruce.
Bravo.